Why do I always use C-Log? Well, for the Canon R6 and Canon R7, C-Log 3. Quick answer, for peace of mind. What's up guys, Dan Frullani here and welcome back to a new video. What do I talk about today? As I told you before the intro, I'm gonna tell you why I always film in C-Log 3, because we're talking about the Canon R6 and Canon R7 here. By the way, right now filming with the Canon R6 in C-Log, of course, C-Log 3. Alright, so let me start from the beginning. When we set our camera to shoot a video, we also have to make a choice which one of the picture styles to use. Because if we don't know any better, we may think that we need to shoot a landscape, so we set it to landscape. Or it's like an interview shot, where then we should set it to portrait, right? No, that's not right. It doesn't really work like that. Why not? Because picture styles are kind of like Instagram filters, and they give a kind of color grading immediately when shooting the footage, giving some amount of saturation, of sharpness, tint, and contrasts. Each one of the default picture styles does it in a different way. The thing is, when we use one of these picture styles, it affects the footage directly. So as long as we are happy with it, straight out of camera, well, that's good. But if we want to modify something, especially the contrast, the highlights and the shadows, well, that's gonna be complicated. Almost impossible, because these default picture styles compromise pretty much the dynamic range of the camera. So that when we use them, we have to make a choice whether to expose for the highlights or for the shadows. That's gonna make a huge difference. Because if we expose for the highlights, the default picture style would make everything else in the shadows way too dark. And then if we try to recover the details in the shadows in post, we can't. It's too late. There's no information, just black. Same thing if we expose for the shadows. Everything else in the highlights would be blown out, and there would be no way on earth to recover what's in the highlights. So that when we use one of the default picture styles, there is always the risk or the possibility that our footage will come out like unusable. But even if we're lucky and it's usable, you will have to be really happy with the result straight out of camera, because otherwise there won't be much to do in post. There's no flexibility. If you try to change or modify the colors too much, they fall apart. And that's true not only for Canon cameras, for all cameras, even drones. Like for example, the other day I went to a place not far away from Madrid just to have fun, shoot photos, videos, and fly drones. So I had the possibility to fly the DJI Mini 2. And this is what I shot. Okay, so what's wrong with it? Well, apparently nothing, but its colors, its shadows, highlights, overall appearance, it's not what I would have done with one of my cameras with C-Log or C-Log 3. Because on the DJI Mini 2, there's no flat profile. I had to make things do, and I'm not saying that it looks bad, but I didn't have any flexibility in post. I just modified a tiny little bit the highlights and shadows, some saturation, some tint, put a LUT, but that's basically about it. When I tried to modify it farther, the colors started to fall apart. So I'm not saying it's bad, again, but I'd rather have more flexibility, especially if it's for some paid work. When I was there, I shot a few samples to show you very quick these default picture styles with very harsh sun. Even though I thought it was exposed correctly for these samples, the highlights are almost blown out. They are in some cases, and the contrasts are way too harsh. There's only one of the default picture styles that is more flexible, let's say, is the neutral. With the neutral, apparently we get less contrast and less saturation, but saturation is not really important here at this point. That's something we can add or reduce whenever we want in post. Also, for what concerns the sharpness, same thing. Even when I use the neutral picture style, and I do, not very often, but I do, it's the only profile I use, the only one of the default picture styles I use when I can't shoot C-Log. Like for example, for time-lapse, I can't shoot in C-Log, so I set it to neutral, but I modify it first. I go in the settings of the profile and I put everything to 0, especially the sharpness and contrasts. So in post I have more flexibility. Why also sharpness? Well, because the camera, when it comes to sharpness, for video, doesn't do a very good job, and I'd rather rely on my good software for that. So I add sharpness in post. And then there's also one of the default picture styles that I don't get it. It's the monochrome. It's like black and white. So here, not only do we lose the dynamic range like highlights and shadows for the contrast, we also lose the colors, because if we shoot using this profile, the monochrome, we don't get the colors. They won't be there. There will be nothing to recover in post. So in black and white we shoot, and black and white is what we'll get. That's it. So even if I wanted something in black and white, I just shoot it with a different picture style, especially with C-Log or C-Log 3. Then in Resolve, Premiere Pro or Final Cut, even in iMovie, I can make it in black and white. After talking about all the limitations of the default picture styles, here's why I prefer 100% C-Log. Again, for what concerns the Canon R6 and Canon R7, C-Log 3. Because it's very flat, and this way we can take full advantage of the entire dynamic range of the camera. I mean, we're not talking about a cinema camera for Hollywood, but when we use a C-Log 3, we can recover pretty much anything in the highlights. I mean, as long as it's not really blown out, like completely, but most of the times we can. I used an RF 35mm f1.8 at first at f4, and it was already kind of overexposed, and I was able to color grade it perfectly. Then, in these samples, I put the aperture wider to f2.8, and it was overexposed, seriously. However, again, I was able to color grade it and recuperate the highlights completely. But it wasn't enough for me. I tried also setting the aperture at f1.8, and it was really overexposed, big time. But when I put it in DaVinci Resolve, that's the software I use, I was able to color grade it like perfectly. Now, what do you think about it? Leave a comment down below, hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. And check the links in the description to see all my gear stuff and things, my gear. And check the link to Epidemic Sound if you want 1 month of awesome music and great sound effects. 1 month for free. Some tips about exposing C-Log 3 correctly. Okay, first thing, it's not a tip, it's actually a kind of a rule. Set the ISO to 800. That's basic, native ISO for C-Log 3. For C-Log 1, 400. C-Log 3, 800. So we get a lot of light. So we shoot outside. I suggest you should be using ND filters. Again, check the links in the description to see the ones I use. especially variable ND filters. Okay, so but sometimes even that's not enough. Don't worry about it, because number one, you can overexpose the footage even by 3 or 4 lines. You'll be able to recover everything in post, like 1.5, 2/3 lines. That'll be ideal. I recommend you to do it, because in my experience, when you overexpose it, not too much of course, you'll be able to recover almost everything in the highlights. But if you underexpose it, or if you think it's well exposed, like perfectly, but then when you go in post there's something that's underexposed, way too dark, well then it's gonna be a little bit more complicated to recover. In my experience, it's easier to recover something that's a kind of overexposed in the highlights rather than something that's underexposed in the shadows. And even if you can manage to recover something, some details in the shadows, the footage might get some digital noise, and that's the worst thing that can happen. So my tip, every time you film in C-Log 3, overexpose it a little bit and you'll be good to go. By the way, the samples you've seen here are in a video for my 3rd channel, because now I have 3 channels. One, this in English, my main channel. My 2nd channel in Spanish, so I get to practice the language. I don't speak it well at all. And my 3rd channel, I opened it like 2-3 weeks ago. It's in Italian, because I'm pretty fluent in the language. Not perfect, but you know, my origins. I'm half French and half Italian, so I should consider opening a channel in French. We'll see. Anyways, to wrap it up, in brief, I shoot in C-Log 3 because I always want to make sure I get usable footage every time I make a video, without wasting time and without risking to be left with nothing, or with something that I don't really like, using one of the default picture styles. So in brief, for peace of mind. Alright, I think I don't have anything else to say. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, smash the like button and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Oh yeah!